Okay, guys, I was cut off on the last video. I was going to go ahead and try to do a problem. But I gave you the 4 steps in finding the inverse. This is again about section 4.1, finding the inverse of a function. So in the last video, I gave you the 4 steps. So I'm going to go ahead and apply them in this problem. Okay, this is again section 4.1, and we're going to do problem number 64. So this is number 64. So your function f of x is given to be negative x cubed minus 2. And they want you to find the inverse of this function. So if you remember I said in the last video, you can either number the 4 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to actually do that in this first example, first case, just so you understand what every step actually is being applied here. But when you're doing on your own problem, for next problem, you don't have to number the step. Just make sure you apply them. You have to apply the 4 steps, but you don't have to number 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? But I'm going to number them in this case. So what was the first step? I think we said we're going to change f of x to y. So you're going to go to your function. We're going to change f of x with y. Step 2 says interchange x and y. So the y is going to become x, and that x is going to become y. And then step 3, as you remember, I said that's where you do most of your labor. And of course, in this case, it's not going to be that bad because the function is not that involved. But in step 3, as you remember, says to solve for y. So if you notice, this is in this equation, this is the only term involves y. So if you want to solve for y, meaning to isolate the y term, we have to get the y by itself on one side. There are a couple of ways you can achieve that goal. I'm going to do it this way. I think maybe a little bit more efficient way. I'm going to go ahead and move the negative x cubed to the left-hand side of the equation. Of course, don't forget to change the sign, which becomes y cubed. And then I'm going to move the x on the other side so we can have only y term by itself. And also make sure you change the sign of x to negative x. Okay, so all I did, I just isolate the y term, in this case the y cubed, by moving the negative y cubed to the left of the equation, which became positive y cubed. And I moved the x next to the negative 2, which became negative 2 minus x. Now, of course, the questions, the step 3 says to solve for y. So now the last issue is to remove the cube or remove the power 3. And then we have our y. So, of course, as you know, to get rid of the cube, just like to get rid of the square, you have to undo that by square root. To get rid of the cube, of course, you do that by taking the cube root. So if this was a 5th power, you do the 5th root, right? So whatever the power is, that tells you which root. So in this case, we're just going to have to basically take the cube root of both sides. So this number is 3. That's what we call a cube root. Cube root. So now there it is. So this cube cancels the cube root. So all you're left with, of course, is y, which is exactly what you want it to be left with. And then on this side, this is going to remain the same as the cube root of negative 2 minus x. And that is your y. And that completes step 3. Don't forget there was a 4th step. And the 4th step basically says to just rename y or change y to f inverse of x. I'm going to actually go ahead and put the 4th step maybe right here. So that way. And so step number 4 was to change y to f inverse of x. Okay. So I'm going to just put f inverse of x equals the same thing basically, because we just changed y to f inverse, which is cube root of minus 2 minus x. Okay, so there it is. So we found the inverse of our very first, function, of course, first function for me on the video, but I'm sure you have already done some example or some problem before 64. But anyway, so as you can see, when they give you a function, all you have to do, apply the 4 steps as I gave you in the last video, which I will also upload that on Blackboard here shortly. So we just apply those 4 steps. And step 1 again, change f of x to y. Step 2, change x and y. So the y became x. That x term became y. And step 3 says to solve for y. So that's where we have to do most of our work to, of course, get the y by itself. So, of course, we start by moving the negative y cube here, which became positive y cube, move the x over there. And then to remove the cube, we took the cube with the both sides. So it wasn't that involved. but obviously we did some definitely more work in step 3 than the rest of the steps, okay? And step 4, of course, was just change the name of y or letter y